so much for joining us. Man, I'm really excited about this. We have Dr. Myers, Dr. Jimmy Myers with us. And originally this had been going to be a family summit where we were all going to be gathered around tables and having him lead us in this discussion, a difficult discussion of children and pornography and the crisis that has created. And so thank you for joining us online. I'm really appreciative of Dr. Myers for doing this from a distance in the best way that we can. We had thought of just maybe rescheduling till August or September and then doing this again because I really valued people being around a table together and having these discussions. But also thought kids are going to be looking at devices and computers and for the next 4, 5, 6 months more than they may have done that in the last couple of years combined. And this is such a time-sensitive issue and topic. For those who are struggling with the topic that's going to be discussed today, didn't want them to struggle, their parents to see that struggle or to not know their kids are struggling for the next 4 or 5 months before anything's tried to be done about it. For those who haven't, anything we can do to be preventative of getting ahead of this for them and not waiting 4, 5, 6 more months before we kind of bring this topic into the light. And so thank you for joining us on here. Just really appreciate it. We have some of our family ministry and Avenue staff. And so going to kind of let them introduce themselves and then I'll get and let you know just a little bit more about Dr. Myers. Whoever wants
to. I'm Alan. I'm the recovery pastor. It's good to see you.
I'm Tracy Alverson, student minister. Glad to be here.
Chad Rogers, student minister. Thank you for joining us.
Stacey Guillen, I'm the Access Special Needs Ministry coordinator.
Lee Coleman. I hang out with our 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders and move stacks of chairs around.
All right, thank you all. And we're really excited to be joined by Dr. Jimmy Myers. He is the founder of the Timothy Center and has been in youth ministry. He is a Howard Payne University graduate, as a few of us on here are. And so, but got to know him, gosh, probably 95, 96, 97. He would come and lead in some student ministry classes and some student ministry conferences at Howard Payne University when I was there. And he has since, I guess, for almost the last 20 years, let him tell you just a little bit more about it. For about the last 20 years, has moved into counseling and has written a couple different books on parenting. And so he's an expert in this field, spends a lot of his time and energy in this. And so we're so grateful to have him join us and just appreciate it. So Dr. Myers, I want to hand it off to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. It's a little odd. We're all kind of developing our new normal. But I'm glad that you really didn't push it off. Pornhub, which is the largest, it's the 800-pound gorilla of porn sites in the world. Some stats that were just released since kind of the nationwide shelter in place. Pornhub's usage has gone up over 10%. And so having the kids at home and having them with electronic devices, in some ways, this is almost the perfect storm. About, 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, we saw this as sort of a coming tsunami because the Timothy Center in Austin, which is the counseling center, we deal a lot with adolescents, and pornography was at play with virtually every kid that we saw. And we knew these kids were getting older and this was a problem. And so we began the process of, now there are 4 of us. We began sexual addiction recovery at the Timothy Center, and we now have 4 CSATs that work with partners and addicts. And we've just recently begun a group just for problematic porn use with teenagers. So it's a subject that we all know is probably not good. But the thought has always been, it's bad, but boys will be boys. Hey, it's not actually, it's not a real person. So it's sort of, for adult men, it's sort of a fair light. And so we've known it was there, but it's sort of been this don't ask, don't tell. And now we're learning that we really, really, really do need to ask and we need to tell, because science has caught up, and now we're learning just kind of how devastating this is. I'm going to share my screen real quick. My wife was quick to point out that let me see, let me start this and then start that. There we go. That we had it's saying pornography a crisis. I mean, how many crises can people, handle at one time? And so I really wanted to back off that a little bit. When you're in the middle of a pandemic, it's really difficult to get people shocked over something else that's a crisis. However, pornography, as we'll see, and it is so much more of a problem, and it's so much more destructive than we ever imagined. And most of it is because science is now caught up, and we now know some things we didn't know in the past. Some of the scarier numbers. The average age of the first internet porn exposure is now between ages 7 and 10 years of age. Most of the time, this is accidental exposure, or some kid on a bus, or sleepovers, that sort of a thing. But now research is showing that by age 10, young boys at least are actively searching for pornography. So it's not some friend or some accidental exposure, but they are actively looking for it by age 10. This one quote from a kid, he said, "I had a favorite porn site before I had a favorite band. I had a fetish before I had a real crush." And I love this. He said, "I let porn into my head and it turned off my heart." So it's happening at much, much younger ages. It used to be, are they old enough to have this discussion? Well, if the average age of first exposure, let's just call it 8 years old, then I'm not sure how young is too young to begin preparing our children for what they're going to see. In 2018, and you can just imagine that it's going to be more than that today, 82% of young men under 30 viewed porn weekly. Weekly. Not that they have viewed porn in the past or occasionally, weekly. So over 80% of young men under 30 are virtually at addictive levels of porn use, and that was a year and a half ago. According to a major UK study, 75% of parents said that their kids don't look at porn, but over half those kids said, "Well, yeah, we do." So I tell parents all the time, your child is not the designated driver. If he's going to these parties, there's a reason they're going to these parties. Your kid is who their friends are, and we know that their friends are looking at porn, and you got over an 8 in 10 shot that your child is looking at pornography. And to just stick your head in the dirt and just say, "Well, not my little boy," that is not working. We're finding that this ostrich approach to things is not working. And if we keep doing the same thing the same way, expecting a different result, we're crazy. Love this researcher. He said, "We started our research seeking men in their 20s who had never consumed pornography. We could not find any." So when you think about if you have a daughter, that young lady will, statistically anyway, never date, get engaged to, or marry a young man who has not consumed, most likely, thousands of hours of hardcore internet pornography. Because those young men statistically don't exist. It is so much, it's because I think it's dirty, it's gross, it's uncomfortable to think about, much less talk about. And so we just kind of shove it to the side. I realize it's a problem, it's kind of grody, but we just shove it to the side and we don't address it. And that approach, again, is coming back to bite us. This was a headline in an op-ed piece in the fall from the Dallas Morning News. It was written by a mother, and this is her headline: when sixth graders can access rape porn on their smartphones, school itself becomes toxic. And her sixth grade daughter at school, two sixth grade boys came up with their phone and showed her rape porn, a gang rape of a girl. And they basically said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do that to you. And here's what we're going to do. And you're going to love it because look at that lady, look at that lady. She loves it. And this was a family. This was a little girl. They were doing everything right. She'd never been exposed to anything. So as long as a sixth grader can access rape porn on his smartphone, then we are sending our children into a toxic, extraordinarily dangerous environment. And it's school. It's just school. It's just math class. It's just PE. But again, it's really wrong for us to look at Satan as, with horns and a bifurcated tail. The best description of Satan is that he's a pervert. The best one would be he's an old man in a trench coat out behind an adult bookstore, because Satan takes good things and he perverts them. He turns them 180 into something that is bad and evil. And so we've got school. What's more wholesome and great and wonderful than school? But now it's an extraordinary, so many schools are going, handing out tablets to kids or laptops to kids. And the bad news about this addiction is these children know so much more than the adults in their lives about how to manipulate the electronic equipment. And so, kids, for the most part, are able to get around the blocking software and stuff relatively easy, if not really monitored. A 2019 study showed that the main reason that young girls viewed pornography was to learn what to do during sexual encounters so they can meet the pornographic expectations of boys. There was always a question, why is 1/3 of pornography being viewed by women? And because women historically have never really been sexually aroused visually, which is why Harlequin romances, they're much more relational driven than just visual, where guys are. I remember Dobson way back in the day said, guys are turned on by what they see, first of all, secondly, by what they see, and then thirdly, by what they see. But that is not true of girls. And so more recent studies have shown why girls and are viewing pornography, and it's because of the saturation of pornography among young boys. So this is all the guys are talking about, and these are what the guys' expectations are. One young man told me in my office, he said, as far as sending nude selfies and sexting and that sort of thing, he looked at me and with a kind of a bewilderment, and he says, well, if I don't see these naked pictures, who am I going to know who to date? He was 14. And he said, I guess you old people used to call this flirting. So now sending nude photographs is considered just how you socially and romantically, this is part of courtship in their mind. These young girls also were afraid that boys think that rough sex is normal because of pornography. That was something else that was demonstrated in this study. One of the more glaring issues, and one that gives us the most pause, is brought up by this sexual assault nurse holler at me if you cannot hear her. Y'all able to hear that? Okay.
So when I became a sexual assault nurse examiner a few years ago, I started to see this phenomenon that nobody was talking about. And what I was seeing, since I only work with children, is that our perpetrators, and not just the kids being assaulted, but the perpetrators are extremely young. And our biggest age range of perpetrators are 11 to 15-year-olds. We see one of the highest volumes of patients in the nation. We're in the top 5% of seeing the highest number of victims, whether that's children or adults. We're seeing kids where the only risk factor is exposure to porn, and that is creating them to act out in ways that are really harmful and really dangerous. And so I think that's really a scary phenomenon that's happening, and yet we don't really hear about it in society. You see the way pornography is so influenced, from incest to multiple perpetrators to them creating amateur porn to degrading her to exploiting her. And I feel like that's a trend we've seen where it's almost this normalized thing to watch other people have sex. I mean, it's the stereotype that you think that it's a boy perpetrating on a girl. However, there are a lot of very young male sexual assault victims as well. So I think it's overwhelming because it just feels like, man, how do we stop this? And that's just so much trauma and pain created in those moments. I've never heard a teenage girl come in, like someone who has the cognitive ability to kind of process what's happened and say, I know that was rape, it wasn't my fault. Sexual assault innately makes people feel like this was my fault. I deserve this. I must be bad. That's why this happened to me. And so frequently my job is just saying, this is not your fault. I'm so sorry, over and over, because we want to validate and empower kids who have been hurt.
It is, it's a little overwhelming to think that the largest age demographic for sexual assault perpetrators is 11 to 15. Because some people don't even think they should have the talk about birds and the bees with a kid that is 11 years old. So, you know, the times, they're not changing, they have changed. And as parents and as youth workers, in family members, we have got to change as well. Some other just scary stats. In 2019 alone, over 65,000 years worth of porn videos were viewed. I'm not sure we can even comprehend that. I just for giggles, I went back and looked, and 65,000 years ago is when they think the first human being stepped foot on the continent of Australia. So since Australians crawled out of caves, in 1 year, that's how many porn videos were viewed in just the year 2019. And, drumroll please, just on one website. Just on one website. And again, we know what that website is. It's Pornhub. The organization that's probably tried to normalize in mainstream pornography more than any other. And if we don't think that Pornhub is actively marketing to children, this was on Pornhub's Instagram feed in the fall. You have Baby Yoda, and then you can see the Pornhub home logo in his eyes. So he's looking at Pornhub with the caption, 10 seconds after my parents leave the house. And what is probably more jarring than just this whole thing is almost 250,000 likes in just one day. Okay. In the 1880s, they thought it was a good idea to put cocaine in toothache drops. In the 1940s, they said, this is a type of menthol cigarette specifically designed to help cure asthma. There was a time in our history that we just didn't know. Science hadn't caught up. We look back on something like cocaine and toothache drops. We look back on that today and just go, well, that's just imbecilic. But back then they didn't know. Well, we're sort of in the imbecilic stage when we're looking at pornography. There's going to come a day we're going to look back on this, but up until now, we just didn't know. But now science has caught up, and science is teaching us the absolute destructive nature of pornography use. There have been numerous studies that confirm without a shadow of a doubt that porn stimulates the same areas of the brain as addictive drugs. And so just like drugs, porn can rewire neural pathways that cause craving, leading users to come back and back for more extreme hits to get high. We now know that with addictions, you fill in the blank. They work the same way, they cause the same structural changes of the brain, and pornography is unquestionably in that category. The concept is consistent, frequent duration. If I'm exposed to material consistently, frequently over a long duration, then my brain physically changes. The neural pathways in my brain physically rewire to adapt to this content that I've been exposed to consistently, frequently over a long duration. You don't learn Mandarin Chinese by reading a pamphlet one afternoon. It is you're exposed to that content consistently, frequently over a long duration. That's how our brains work. The concept is known as neuroplasticity, that our brain is plastic, it's malleable. And so it can change depending upon what it's being exposed to consistently, frequently, over a long duration. If you think about the brainstem as the engine of the brain, and the limbic system, or the reward center it's called, if you think of that as the accelerator, that's where, that's the primitive part of the brain. That where the sex drive is located. Because the primitive part of your brain is telling you to pass your genes along to the next generation. That's the part of your brain that makes you want to eat fattier foods, because you might have to exist out in the Serengeti alone until you can nail another saber-toothed tiger. That's the primitive part of the brain that's telling us to push forward to meet our own needs. But human beings have a prefrontal cortex, and which is the braking system. So if the brainstem is the engine, the limbic system or the reward center is the accelerator, pushing us forward to selfishly meet our own needs, then the prefrontal cortex is the braking system. If the primitive part of the brain says, I want 12 donuts, it's the prefrontal cortex that says, maybe one would be good. So it puts the brakes on our selfish cravings, basically. But what we're finding is that consistent pornography use interrupts that process. Dr. Simone Kuhn said, we found that the more porn people watch, the less their prefrontal cortex was able to control activity in the reward center. So the connection between the prefrontal cortex, the braking system, and the reward system was less strong. And man, I wish I could get my hands on it, but there was a video where they're kind of live MRIing a person's brain, and this guy was a porn addict. And you kind of see, kind of like you see now, the little corner of the screen, as soon as you can see the blood flow in his brain. And when he began looking at porn, you saw blood being diverted out of the prefrontal cortex and being fed into the reward center. So you could physically see him take his foot off of the brake and apply it to the accelerator. Science has caught up. We now see that pornography, yes, it's a moral failure. Yes, it's a sin. Nobody's making any claim otherwise. And addiction is no get out of jail free card. If I'm an alcoholic and I run over a kid in my car, I own that. I go to jail for life. Good, go, I should. I got to own my behavior. However, it's different. These young men, these older men will say, why can't I stop? This is not who I am. Why can't I say no? Now we're learning some of the physiological aspects of why it is profoundly more difficult for that person with his brain wired that way than for the average person. Because a non-addicted person, basically will, like for an alcoholic, will just stop drinking, says the non-addicted person. It seems very easy if your brain is not wired that way. But for that person whose brain has been, that neuroplasticity has taken place and those neural pathways have been changed, it's profoundly more difficult. Another way in which the brain changes is this concept of supernormal, that our brains seek that which is new and different and unique and novel. Very famous experiment was done a few years ago, and the researchers basically took butterflies, and they took female butterflies and they made cardboard replicas of the female butterflies. And they made these replicas just slightly larger, and they made the color scheme slightly more vibrant. And then they let all the real butterflies, both male and female, into the cages, and the male butterflies immediately tried to have sex with the cardboard butterflies, with the real females fluttering right there. They preferred the supernormal that was cardboard over the real female partner. And we find that that effect is trans-species. It's not just butterflies. It's human beings as well. I'll tell guys all the time, do you remember the first time you ever had sex with your wife? And they went, absolutely. Do you remember the 32nd time? No, I don't. Because it wasn't novel. It wasn't the first. It wasn't new. It wasn't groundbreaking. That is what our brains seek out, like a heat-seeking missile, which is why pornography basically in and of itself is super normal. It's different. Which drives paraphilias and fetishes, because it's always something new. It's something taboo. It's something forbidden. It's something that's on the other side. It is super normal, which is why a wife will never fulfill that role. Guys will think, I'm just going to watch porn until I get married. Then I won't need to watch porn because I'll just have sex all the time, anytime I want it. No, this is why for the most part, they all go back, because I don't care what the wife is doing. There was a couple, and she was desperately trying to hold on to her husband, so he kept introducing different pornographic, sexual activity and all the, up into including installing a stripper pole in their bedroom and her taking classes. And she did all of it in an attempt just to keep him. And finally, when she just refused to have a threesome, he divorced her. And this was a Baptist deacon Sunday school teacher. Because it didn't matter if his wife was doing it, because it was his wife doing it. Which is why, a wife can never satisfy that itch that the porn or sex addict has. And then the other way that's pretty obvious, way in which pornography eventually desensitizes the brain. This was a client of mine, well, that's not his picture, but a client of mine, he was showing me his girlfriend on his phone, and he said, dude, check it out. He said, that's what I F every weekend. And what was disturbing about that was not he was showing me the girl that he was having underage sex with every weekend, but what he said was, that's what I F every weekend. Not who, not I would like it to introduce you to Kristen, my girlfriend, with whom I have sex with every week. It wasn't that, it was that's what I F every weekend. And of course, this is the concept of objectification, that over time, in someone who has consistently, frequently, over a long duration been exposed to these sexualized images, they stop viewing real human beings as real human beings. They see them as objects. They lose their humanity. Another really shocking study was done at Princeton, and they showed a group of men who regularly look at porn. They showed them pictures of people, and some of the pictures were not pornographic, but they were certainly sexualized, and some were not. And then what they were doing, they were monitoring the part of the brain that I cannot pronounce, but basically it recognizes human faces. That's what that part of the brain does, and telling one face from another. And for the most part, the human face recognizer was activated with every picture that was shown. However, when the subjects were shown the picture of the sexualized people, that part of the brain that recognizes human faces did not even activate. We've got to let that just sit there for a second. That part of the brain that recognizes human faces didn't even turn on. So the automatic reaction in their brains actually suggested that they didn't perceive these sexualized people as being human. They didn't see them as human beings. I had an attorney, sex addict, porn addicted, and he fell off the wagon. And when I asked him, you know, what genre, what was it that, you know, he watched, you know, he said, well, it was a group of men and a young girl. And I said, okay, try to envision that scene as clearly as you can in your mind. And he said, okay. And I said, now then, take that girl out and put in your 15-year-old daughter, Emily. And of course, his eyes popped open, and he says, that's gross. Yeah, it is. It is gross. And it's gross when that young girl in that porn video is involved in that too. But as soon as his brain connected the dots that that young lady being gang raped was a human being, it automatically, his brain kicked back in. The problem was he didn't see that young lady as being human at all. So not only does prolonged porn exposure impact our brains, it is also toxic to relationships. Studies, multiple, have shown that porn erodes a person's ability to love and to feel loved. When men are exposed to porn, they rate themselves as less in love with their partners, and they are less satisfied with their relationships and their sex lives. They become more critical and dissatisfied with their partner's appearance, sexual performance, and displays of affection. This is very ironic, but porn is directly related to problems with attraction, arousal, sexual performance, as well as lower sex drives, erectile dysfunction, and difficulty reaching orgasm. And you would think it would be the exact opposite of that. But it actually, over time, really debilitates the whole sexual drive arousal process within the human body. Before 2010, statistically speaking, the rate of erectile dysfunction and low libido was statistically 0 in men under 30 years of age. Now, 25% could qualify for those diagnoses. The Journal of Sex Medicine in 2020 said testosterone levels have declined in adolescents and young adult males over the last decade. And again, the only risk factor being exposure to pornography. So teens are having less sex. Yay. I mean, why aren't we celebrating the fact that teenagers are actually having less sex than they've had in decades? This should be good news, but it's not. Teenagers are more sexual today than in the history of humanity. They're just not being sexual with other human beings. There was a study in the UK last year that found that 1 in 3 teens found real sex disappointing. When they actually had sex, it was a letdown because it did not measure up to their expectation of sex that porn had taught them. Current research shows that for Gen Z, those under 22, rough sex, which is hair pulling, biting, aggressive behavior, was the second most popular porn category. Porn teaches over time that rape or hurting your partner is not only fun and pleasurable, it is normal. Over 80% of porn scenes involve violence toward the woman in some capacity, whether she is spit on, whether she is slapped, whether she is roughly treated, over 80%. So again, if we look at first exposure between 7 and 10, and they're exposed to this consistently, frequently, over a long duration, you have a generation of young men that have enormously different expectations when they do begin to be sexually active. Among the most searched terms on Pornhub in 2019 were mom, sister, and incest. So it is, and again, why do you think that is? That we're back to the super normal. These young men, mostly young men, it's not just a boy and a girl having sex. It's now got to be more than that. For those Gen Z that were looking at rough sex, it's not just sex, it's got to be more than that. They push beyond just looking at a boy and a girl having sex. That doesn't get them the same pop of dopamine that it used to. So now it's got to be something more, and they're pushing to these other more perverted levels of pornography. A study in 2017, a review of 43 different studies found that exposure to sexually explicit media among adolescents and emerging adults is related directly to greater acceptance of domestic and sexual violence and the actual domestic and sexual violence perpetration. There's the smoking gun. 43 different studies said you look at porn over time, you're going to have a greater acceptance of domestic violence and sexual violence. And not only a greater acceptance, but more actual perpetration of those crimes. Those are, by the way, crimes. And 43 studies showed that porn desensitizes young men in this way. In 2016, a meta-analysis of over 135 different studies found that porn use was directly associated with greater body dissatisfaction in the male and their partner, support of sexist beliefs, tolerance of sexual violence against women, and a diminished view of women's competence, morality, and humanity. Once again, consistent, frequent, duration. We have a generation of young men whose brains have been damaged by this and continue to be damaged by this. And we don't even have time to get into how porn and child sex trafficking are exactly the same thing. We could go on and on about that very thing. This is not a victimless crime. And so that is another just egregious aspect of this whole, every time someone clicks a pornographic link, they are feeding the child sex trafficking around the globe. All right. So the idea that you can just turn off porn watching anytime you want to is not consistent with the research. It's not, oh, well, I'm going to do this when I'm young or whatever, but then when I get in a serious relationship, I'm not going to have a need to, because the only reason I'm doing this now is I don't have a girlfriend or I don't have a wife. And so I have to. That's a myth. It is just a myth. Those 82% under 30 that are watching porn weekly, that doesn't stop when they turn 30. It doesn't stop when they get married. It doesn't stop if they're on church staff. It doesn't stop. It doesn't stop. One of the things that their addicted brain will tell them to keep them going and feeling okay about what they're doing is because I can just turn this off when I want to. And research tells us that that's not true. The problem with boys will be boys is because those boys become men, and then they put all of this education that they've been getting since they were 8 years old into practice. So over half the men in your church are looking at pornography regularly. Forget the kids. Over half of the men in your church, if statistics hold true, which they do, and your church isn't any different, over half the men, again, over half the church staff is going to be looking at pornography on a regular basis. Those are simply what the numbers say, and the numbers are fairly indisputable. There were 2 studies recently that showed that the more religious a man was, the more vulnerable to porn addiction they were. And one has to ask, why is that? You would think that the full armor of God would be good and it would be helping in this situation. And with many it is. However, the driving force behind sexual addiction is shame. All sex addicts feel bad about what they're doing, but you take a believer who's called by my name, who supposedly is living by a different standard, called to a higher calling, will jack up their shame by about 10%, and it's the shame that drives the addiction. And take a church staff member or a pastor, you jack their shame up about 1,000%. We have one of our sex addiction groups at the Timothy Center that is made up of nothing but church staff members and pastors. It is an enormous problem within the church and within church staffs. Shame pushes Christian men into toxic isolation. The way this works, basically, is I feel so bad about who I am because of what I've been doing. I'm horrible, I'm wretched, I'm disgusting. And it's because I love Jesus so much that I hate myself so much about what I'm doing. I make myself want to throw up thinking about who I am and my blatant hypocrisy. And again, we're thinking, man, if I don't feel that way about myself, then I'm minimizing what I'm doing. And there we're back to Satan being a pervert. Only he can take something as good, which is really hating your behavior and the sin that's in you, and actually turn that into the fuel that drives the addiction. Shame pushes into isolation, self-loathing, and then the only way that you can feel any better at all, or just to numb out a bit, is to use again. And since shame is the fuel, shaming people is only going to make the problem worse. It's not going to fix it. The way that Christianity, at least for the past few decades, has handled sin is to wag a finger at people. You stop this. It's horrible. Jesus hates you because of it. Just stop this. It's bad. It's bad. You're bad. Stop it. And all we're doing, it's like those old steam engines where you're just taking the coal and you're just throwing it in and you're just ramping it up and making it even worse. So if we want to stop the problem, we've got to address this differently in our churches. And shaming people is not going to be the motivation to stop. In fact, psychologically, it just drives them deeper and fuels the addiction even more. I love this guy, Jonah Mix. He said, I'm not interested in a world where men really want to look at porn but resist because they've been shamed. I'm interested in a world where men are raised from birth with such an unshakable understanding of women as living human beings that they are incapable of being aroused by their exploitation. Come on, that's really good. Okay, so the greatest lie that Satan ever told was it doesn't exist, right? Well, the second biggest lie Satan ever told was that porn's not a problem, and it certainly is not a problem in our church. So what do? Because it's in my opinion, maybe it's because of what I do for a living, but it's my opinion that pornography is a cancer that is eating the church, destroying the church from the inside out. When you look at the declining numbers in baptisms and church attendance and millennials fleeing the church, I'm not saying porn is the reason for that. I'm saying it's a big contributor to that. The church in America is impotent. It's lost its authority, its moral authority, its power. You can't have over half of Christian men and a third of Christian women with this level of toxicity in their brain that absolutely severs any intimacy with God, and think that the church is just going to go on unabated. It can't work that way. First of all, we've got to be able to talk about it. You doing this today is evidence of that. There was a day that churches would no more have talked about this than a man on the moon. 4 years ago, my son and I do a podcast called Paradox. And apparently there's a acquisitions editor, a major Christian publisher that listens. And she said, hey, y'all are kind of funny. Why don't y'all, what do you see come through your door? What would be great? What would be a topic? And both of us immediately said, porn. And her reaction was to audibly laugh. She laughed. This was 4 years ago. She said, there is not one Christian publisher that will publish a book about pornography. And there's not one Christian woman, who are the only people who buy Christian books, they're going to walk out of a Christian bookstore with a book about pornography. At the youth conclave, gosh, what was it? Might have been maybe 3 years ago, maybe 3-4 years ago. I was going to do the Porn Again youth minister. And I remember they gave me like the biggest room because, whoa, is this a big problem? And 3 women and 1 guy came in. Those young men would not be caught dead, looking as if they might even know where that room was. It was like we were handing out the Ebola virus. Times have changed. We're having this discussion in your church. My calendar was packed with doing this talk in churches. My literary agent has a lot of interest from several publishers about doing a book on pornography. Times have changed, and it begins with us talking about it in our families, talking about it in our churches. This lady, she's the ex-spouse of a porn addict. She says, I imagine the reason why 60% of people in church watch porn is because to this day, porn is still a taboo topic. God's people will continue to suffer in silence until the church starts talking about it. And we have to talk about it in a non-judgmental way. Because again, here's the thing with judging people. I can't judge you simply because you may be sinning differently than I'm sinning. For me to judge you, for me to wag a finger at you, is to imply I am perfect. There was Jesus, the perfect person 2,000 years ago, and then 2,000 years later, the second perfect person popped out, me. And so because I'm perfect, I get to wag my finger at you. Doesn't work that way. Just because this person may struggle with pornography doesn't make them a worse Christian, a worse human being. It means they're sinning just like I'm sinning. So we have got to take this moral, this righteous indignation out of this equation and see it for what it is. We have got men whose brains have been changed since early in their life, at no fault of their own, really, for most of them, because it was children when this whole process, they were children when it started. We've got to see it for what it is, a biological mechanism. This neuroplasticity has caused their brain to really malfunction, and we have to treat it that way. Yes, it's sin. Yes, it grieves God. But if I read Romans 8:1 correctly, there's no condemnation for those that are in Christ Jesus. When he met the woman, caught in adultery, well, where are those that would condemn you? Well, they're gone, Lord. Well, I don't condemn you either. Now, stop doing what you're doing. I think there's a very clear way that we can separate those two things. Stop doing what you're doing. But I do that not condemning you, not judging you. So practically, what can we do? Every device that connects to the internet has to have blocking and accountability software. Just absolutely no brainer. We give a 13-year-old boy a smartphone and then we're shocked with what they do with it. It's unbelievable. First off, no child should have a smartphone until they're 16, but if they've got it, then we've got to lock it down. It's too important. It's nauseating how many parents flip a kid this phone because it keeps the kid out of their hair with no blocking software at all because, oh, I know my son, he's not looking at porn, which is why 82% of men under 30 are looking at porn. Follow on every platform that you have. Fight the New Drug. They're a great organization. So many of the stats you saw came from this organization. They're amazing. If you want to see the case against pornography and what we do with our teenagers here at the Timothy Center and with our adults, it is a non-judgmental, here's what's happening to your brain, and here's how we turn this around. Because research has shown that if you do this and we do several things that are called neural restructuring exercises. So if you do this work, it's not about stopping the behavior. If you do the undergirding work as to how your brain got there in the first place, after 3 to 5 years, you have no more of a risk of acting out than the general population. We're learning. Science is teaching us. The bad news about neuroplasticity is this sort of thing can change your brain. The good news about neuroplasticity is your brain can change back. There can be a day when you can CAT scan a brain and it's completely different than during the time that they were addicted. You just see a healthy brain that the connections are all correct and working properly. The brakes have been fixed. And this would be a great organization to follow. Here's something that I would love for your church and your families to do. Every family get on to brainheartworld.org. This is put out by Fight the New Drug. There are 3 30-minute videos. One does a lot of what we explained here, how porn impacts the brain, how porn impacts relationships, and then how porn impacts the world. It's got discussion questions for families. It will begin the discussion. And again, you would have to, the way they did this is so appropriate and it's funny, oddly enough. I was talking to the president of Fight the New Drug, and they said that they made these so that 8th graders could understand. So they're explaining neuroplasticity and neuroplasticity and mirror neurons and all of the supernormal in ways that an 8th grader could get it. So I highly recommend that one of the first steps that a family and a church can take is working through these videos just to understand this message even more. And then there is this an app that you can get on your phone. It's called Fortify. And it's just a self-progressing program that can help wean somebody off of and keep them off of pornography. The downside of something like Fortify is it keeps someone isolated. The main way in which you treat sexual addiction in therapy is through group therapy, because you have to be around other people. They have to see you inside and out, all that you are, because it helps you come out of that toxic isolation. But short of getting that type of therapy, Fortify is a really, really good tool to use. This stuff is in here just because I do most of this talk around the Austin area. But actually, with things the way they are now, insurance is now picking up and using and paying for online. People in your area could actually, teens could get into the problematic porn use group, as well as these other things that we offer. The Paradox podcast, Josh and I, who is the co-owner with me at the Timothy Center, we talk a lot about marriage. We talk a lot about family, parenting, cultural stuff. And that's also a lot of what you're going to get if you follow me on Twitter or on Facebook. We put out just a ton of articles that have to do with some of the latest research and things of that nature. Just absolutely self-plugging. This one, I don't have it actually, I don't know why I don't. But the second edition of Toe to Toe, which was put out in 2009, is out. And this is about really how to, when you're raising really oppositional defiant teens. And this was a couple of years ago, co-wrote with George Barna, just on some, raising faithful kids in a secular culture. All right, let's get to questions. And let me look. Looking over at the chat. When should parents begin the sex conversation with kids? Really, 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 really early. In fact, one of the chapters that we talked about in Fearless Parenting, the Barna book, was how we've really got to change fundamentally how we're handling sex in our homes. Because right now, sex is sort of the Voldemort of Christian homes. It's that which must not be named. In fact, it's make sure you wash your doodle. We're not even calling private parts. We're not calling penises and vaginas by their actual name. It's so horribly shameful. We have to come up with euphemisms for body parts. We've got to normalize sex in our homes. We can be watching an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie or something with our kids and people are getting shot and blown up. But if half of one breast we lunge in front of our children to block their view. They get that. What are we doing? We are, by our silence, we are setting up a generation of young boys. We're feeding them to the porn industry on a platter. If we started talking about sex, normalizing it, what it is, why it is, what God's purposes of it are from a young age. So when they're in the 5th grade and somebody shows them rape porn on the bus, they're not curious about it. They know what sex is, and they know why sex is, and that what God's purpose for sex was. They know that mom and dad have sex, and that mom and dad love having sex. It's a great and beautiful and wonderful thing. That's another thing. We say that all the time. Oh, sex is God-given and it's beautiful. But if they say anything or see anything, we just explode. So we're sending very mixed messages to our kids. But if we prepare our kids for that first exposure, now, and if the first exposure is between 7 and 10, means we got to start early, just normalizing what sex is. Because to tell them what sex is, for us to be silent and sex is this taboo thing, we're teaching them exactly what the porn industry is teaching them. Sex isn't something that's dirty, and it's something that between a man and a woman is a beautiful, great, wonderful thing. And if our kids know what it is, why it is, then we have done a lot better job preparing them for that day when that exposure to pornography happens, because it is going to happen. Let's see. How should a parent react when they realize their children have been viewing pornography? Well, probably after what we just went through, the first thing is with no shaming whatsoever. There can be no, I can't believe you would do this. This so goes against what you say you believe. We didn't raise you this way. Because what are you doing? It's the coal and the shovel, and you're just feeding the fire of that addiction. That cannot be how we approach our kids. It just can't. If we want to be effective, it's, buddy, I understand. And in some ways, I'm going to share in some of this with you because I should have locked down your stuff more than apparently I have, because you were able to find this. And so we're going to learn about this together. We're going to see why this is harmful. Keep this out of moralizing at all. We're just going to see why this is harmful. And because I don't want you, I had a 15-year-old in my office that could not have sex with his girlfriend because of ED without thinking of pornography. 15 years old. So this is no longer, it used to be, oh boy, porn is going to harm your marriage. You might as well be saying, oh, it's going to really take out of your 401k. I mean, a teenager, they don't even think in those terms. So we got to talk more immediate ramifications for them and let them know that they're there and how it hurts their brain. And because I love you and I want you to grow up and have your body function the way it should, we're going to do everything we can to keep this away from you. But I understand why you have a draw to it. I understand that. And if you've been looking at it for any length of time and realize that when you find them, like teenagers are, working for teenagers with years really helped me working with sex addicts. Because, basically they are going to admit to the very minimum they have to admit to in order to appear transparent. And so when your kid says, yes, I did this, I've only done it a couple other times, no, it's probably been about 6 months that they've been looking at it regularly. And so I understand that, and we're going to work together with this. See me, look at me. I'm not yelling at you. I'm not disappointed in you. I love you to death, and we're going to work together to solve this problem, because that's all it is. It's a problem, and we're going to solve it. That goes a long way. Let's just say that works anywhere around 1,000 times better than moralizing and shaming and wagging a finger. That's what we absolutely got to stay away from. How do mom and dads begin the conversation with their kids when they themselves don't want to approach the subject because of their own shame? Yes. Really, when we started the problematic porn group, we were going to kind of treat it as an addictive thing. And it was Josh who said, those kids don't think they have a problem. In fact, probably dad doesn't think they have a problem. Mom's the only one that thinks this is a problem, and everyone else is saying she's crazy for thinking this way. And this is just a great big hug to moms out there that no, you're the one that's thinking straight. But you're right. If all these men are looking at porn as well, it's very hard for them to approach it. But this is where husband and wives have to talk. We've got to say, yes, this has been happening. And I'm telling you, the vast majority of these men are going to say, and it started when I was about 8. So their brains got impacted when they were children at no fault of their own when they were kids. And for some of them, they can't turn that off. And so husband and wives have to start talking. Guys have got to say, this is a problem with me. Please help me fix this. I don't want to be doing this. I don't want to be doing this any more than you want me doing this. So please help me to stop. It's just we take all the condemnation, all the shame out of these conversations, and let's simply fix it. Should kids younger than 8th grade watch the videos? Without question. Without question. Now, a ton younger, they're not going to understand the concepts really, but certainly, 10 years old, yeah, they're gonna get what this is saying. They spend a lot of money on these things. They are done really well, and they use some animation to explain some of these things. That it's entertaining. It's amazing that they did what they did with this topic, and it's appropriate. It's pretty amazing. So absolutely younger than 8th grade. You mentioned Covenant Eyes. Is there a best way to safeguard devices? There are so many different things that can be used. Some of them more draconian than others. Some they just need that accountability and that basic keeping you off. But I've got one guy that'll sit there and he'll just work on his his phone or his laptop for hours until he finally breaks it. And there hadn't been one blocking software, net nanny, any of these things that have worked with him because he just sets himself upon breaking it. But for most, you just want guardrails, and there's numerous different kinds. But things like net nanny are stricter than Covenant Eyes would be. But I mean, it's a pretty easy task to get out there and find them. But there is no reason. And if you have a husband pushing back that, oh, because of my work, nope. There is no reason. And if, it's a pain, fine, let it be a pain. But this is, again, if you've got someone who struggles with porn, it's like an alcoholic just keeping a flask of whiskey in his pocket. His chances of remaining sober are just slim and none, unless these things are locked down. My son, who is in the 6th grade, always tells me that I'm too overprotective because I won't allow him to have Snapchat, TikTok, or YouTube. My fear is I'm pushing him toward hiding things from me because some of his other friends have those apps. He says it's because I don't trust him. He doesn't understand that I'm trying to protect him. Without question. It's funny because, again, I would tell you that kid doesn't get a smartphone until he's a sophomore in high school, much less in the 6th grade. This idea of handing 6th graders and younger these smartphones and allowing them on Snapchat is imbecilic. There's no other way of looking at it. Everything that we want our child to have a phone for is accomplished in the dumb part of the phone. Texting, phone calling. Everything that they get in trouble for, everything that can destroy their lives, all of it happens on the smart part of the phone. So This is not a smartphone problem. This is a dumb, lazy parent problem. You're not pushing him. Y'all aren't old enough, but there was an old Archie Bunker, Carol O'Connor, who All in the Family. His son died of a drug overdose, and I remember to this day, there was this public service announcement that was just a close up of Carol O'Connor's face, and all he said was, "Do whatever it takes to get between your child and drugs." That was it. And I remember it 40 years later. I would say, parent, do whatever it takes. Your job is not to make sure your child is popular. Your job is not for your child to like you. That's not your job. You'll notice that the heads of Google and all these tech firms, their children don't get smartphones. Have you ever heard them? Almost universally, these people don't allow their children to have smartphones because they know. So a sixth grader having TikTok, you should call CPS. That is one horrific parent that would allow that. There are young girls that have private Snapchat rooms that you subscribe to, and they're making thousands of dollars a month. These are young, minor, adolescent girls by performing sex acts in these private Snapchat rooms. Doesn't matter if your child likes it or it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If you're going to do that, just hand them a bottle of Jack Daniels, and a bag of cocaine. I mean, our job is not for our children to be happy. When some parent says, "All I want is for my child to be happy," I just want to slap them. If that it is for a Christian parent, that may be the single lamest goal ever. One bout of diarrhea, and there's your life goal out the window, because happiness is not something that can be attained like that. Happiness can't be our goal for our child. Christ-likeness, that's something else. For my child to follow in the steps of Christ, now that's a goal for our children, but not for them to be happy. Again, I was, a weekend in Vegas with, cocaine and hookers. Okay, that can make them happy, I guess. If happiness is your goal, happiness can't be the goal. So I understand, because you don't want your child angry at you. But if they're telling you everyone else's parents are doing that, then thank God that you are the best parent your child knows. When a friend is over, how should devices be addressed? You never know the things that they have access to, without question. In fact, in a weird way, sleepovers may be dead. None of my children, I've got 3 adult kids, I got 7 grandkids. Sleepovers are out, because the 11 to 15-year-olds that are perpetrating sexual assaults, that's where it's happening. It's happening going over to a kid's house when parents are not there. It's during sleepovers. And so those things just simply have to stop. And if you've got a friend over that's playing, I absolutely would institute, hey, you got a friend here, y'all go do friend things, phones go up. And that's your friend's phone as well. That's just how this happens here. Because you're right, you don't know. You may know what you do with you and your child. You do not know what other people are doing. Other Christian families, it doesn't matter. You don't know. Okay, that's the end of the listed questions. Any others?
Well, I want to just thank you. I wish you felt the freedom to really speak truth on these answers. So,
No, I get a little passionate.
No, that's fantastic. One thing I would like for Alan just to speak to real quick, for the parents that, as you addressed earlier, that feel the shame. And until a parent begins to fess up and to get help, it's going to be really difficult for them to confront that within their kids. So, Alan, could you speak just to a little bit to our parents who are listening and our adults who are listening, as to what the church provides and what you can help them, how we can help them as a church deal with their issues?
Well, we learned early on in Celebrate Recovery, we try to establish groups based on issues. And early on in our recovery program, I started a group, and outside the door, we put sexual addiction or porn addiction, I think, over the door. And that night, zero came, zero. And so I realized soon that, nobody, the shame and the guilt that comes along with it, the room was empty. I let it lay for about 2 weeks. We renamed the group Sexual Integrity, and now the room is packed. In fact, we typically have to split the group. So we had to make it safe for them. And again, I liked what was said here is we provide a group for the men, and probably need to do it for the women as well. But for the men, we provide a group where they're transparent, they're open, and we don't shove it any longer. We don't walk away from it and say there's no problem. So we just identify it. We're a group. But I hear over and over on Monday nights, I wish I had this opportunity when I was a student. And I think sometimes we don't want to address when they're students. And so we just shove it to the side. And so I'm just thankful that we have a church that's proactive, that we aren't afraid to talk about it. We do have the landing for our students that our listening parents not only address it, but don't be afraid to bring your students up on Monday nights at 7:00, where they can have other peers and they can have leaders that are willing to step up, talk about it, and not put it over in the corner and hope it doesn't come out. So we are aggressively trying to address the issue, Jason. That's a good point. Man, I love this. Incredible. Good job.
Thank you, Alan. One of the things I wanted to just reiterate as well, and we do family camp at Sky Ranch, and our students go to weekend retreats at Sky Ranch, and they have some of the most incredible godly college kids. The big statistics are once kids graduate high school, a lot of them walk away from the faith for a while. These are the kids who haven't, for the most part. These are kids who Jesus is still really the key figure in their life. And we do a panel every single year where we ask college students, and every parent will ask kind of these kids different questions. And one of the questions always talks about smartphones and apps and that kind of stuff. And every time they're asked about Snapchat, 100% of these college kids have said the exact same thing. And they say that Snapchat is only used to hide things from their parents. Mm-hmm. That's the only good it is. And so these are 21, 22-year-old kids who I look at my kids in 10 years, I want them to be like Christ, but these are the kids I look at, man, I want them hanging around college students like these and to become similar to these kids. And these are the ones that are saying, my parents gave me a phone too early. I wish in hindsight they would have regulated it a little bit more. But with Snapchat, it is only good for hiding things. And there is no good reason to have Snapchat, according to these kids, that I think most of us would desire our kids to be in their shoes in 10 years.
And I remember, if you ever read Radical by David Platt, well, that's probably why you're so spiritually shallow, because you haven't read that yet. But it's phenomenal, and he talks about being in Asia, where because his big thing is underground churches, and so he's in this country in Asia where Christianity is illegal, and two teenagers come up because in that service they were being commissioned, these two teenage brother and sister, to leave and go and plant a church in another part of this country where, again, it's illegal. And they told David Platt, these two teenagers said, my parents were imprisoned for their faith, and we know there's a chance that we could be imprisoned or killed because of what we're about to go and do. But our parents taught us that Jesus is worth all of our devotion. Those parents taught those children Jesus was worth dying for. You want to talk about the impotence of the American church? We can't even teach our children that Jesus is worth not having Snapchat for. I mean, it is so, it would be laughable if it wasn't sickening. Famous quote from the Chinese believer who said, I know you Christians in America are praying that we Christians in China will survive our persecution. We're praying that y'all will survive your prosperity. And what we're finding is the church in America is not surviving its prosperity. If Christian parents cannot do even that, we're so afraid that our children are going to stand out in any way, and we want them to be liked. I mean, nowhere are we hearing parents talk about, I want my child to be godly. You know, and again, it's also, we're not called of God to raise godly kids. We're called of God to be godly parents. That's what we're called to be. Godly children are just sort of the trickle down effect of having two, you know, Christ following parents.
That's great. Anybody else have any questions before we let Dr. Myers go?
I got one. I know that, you know, maybe a parent, or maybe there's adult watching, or a student feels stuck in this addiction. And we've talked a lot about, you know, the wiring of your brain. Is the hope there that you could rewire that to, I know recovery is different for everyone, but to kind of rewire that back to the way God has created it to be. Does that question make any sense? And I guess the long term, I know recovery is for an alcoholic, they're going to battle through that for the rest of their life. Is that the same approach with this addiction as well?
You know, it is. But when you do the neural restructuring work, where these you know, the brain is no longer in this preset position to needing the extra hits of dopamine that the sexual acting out, you know, will provide, and that over time, that miswiring rewires in a healthier way. And what you find is, it is not 10 years down the road, man, I wish I could sleep with a prostitute or watch porn. Whew, I'd give anything, but I'm not going to. No, your want tos change. Again, there does come a time and where the thought of exploiting young women, the thought of exposing my soul to that content is so abhorrent to me that it's unthinkable. So it really is a change in the way your brain views this content, more than, whoo, boy, I wish I could. It's called dysphoric recall. And I just remember how horrible that blackness was, and I am not going within a country mile of that now. So it's really a fundamental sea change in the way your brain processes this.
That's great. Anybody else? Well, thank you, Dr. Myers. Really appreciate all of your insight. And so also, would you mind, because you do remote counseling, and correct? Is that right?
Yes, we can. All of our groups and individual are open. During this time, insurance will pay for online counseling now, where before it wouldn't. But as soon as this declaration's over with, the insurance companies are going to go back to not paying for it. If someone wants to, pay the cash rate to do these things, then they can do them at any time, anywhere. But for insurance, it's going to have to kind of be within this window.
Okay, so how would they contact you if they want to?
TimothyCenter.com.
TimothyCenter.com. Awesome.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much. This has been very eye-opening. I think as a staff, we've got a lot to unpack from it, but just thank you so much for your time today.
I appreciate it. And listen, for y'all's church to be open to even have this discussion is phenomenal. And it really is. It's one of these things where, churches like yours are beginning to shine a light in this dark area. And, this is sort of a get thee behind me, Satan moment for the church. And you guys are making that happen. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Avenue families, thank you so much for joining us today. Man, if you've got questions, let us know. Contact anybody in our staff, from Alan to any of our family ministry staff. We want to be there. We want to resource you. We've got some great resources already, too. Some books we can point you to on how to introduce sexual health to your kids at different ages, from preschool age to elementary age to student ministry age, to how to introduce those conversations. So we want to help resource you in any way we can. We love you guys. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you hopefully sooner than later around the Avenue.